Let's talk about that game in Atlanta, Will. SEC Championship.
Let's do it.
Number 2, Texas. 2.5-point favorites. How about that? Number 5, Georgia. The over-under is 1 Georgia scoring drive of 35 yards. How about that?
Okay.
Last time these teams played, that's what Georgia had. 1 scoring drive of 35 yards. Georgia scored 30 points when it had 1 scoring drive of 35 yards. Granted, one drive that was at least 35 yards. It was the biggest drive of the game. It was an 11-play, 89-yard drive in the fourth quarter, right after Texas had made it a 1-score game. Fans were throwing trash in the field. You get it. You remember that. But that's your reminder of 2 things. One, the Texas defense played really, really well that night, despite what the 30 points suggested. Technically their worst defensive game of the year from just a scoreboard standpoint. And we're going to get to the Carson Beck.
This was an all-time like top tier team matchup because to your point, and like we keyed on this at the time, this is no breaking news, but both offenses were pretty comfortably not good that day, but both defenses were so Super Saiyan amazing, and Georgia's obviously was a 12 out of 10 and Texas's was a 10 out of 10. But this is one of the as a precedent, like this is for sure a game that would be good to get another of because the odds of exactly that happening again are so
I mean, Georgia winning a game like that where Carson Beck is that bad, it's extremely unique. I mean, again, getting to 30 points with 1 scoring drive of more than 35 yards is or of at least 35 yards. They had a drive that was 34 yards. That's why I set it at 35. That's the way that always works. Georgia repeating that, you're right, seems next to impossible. But what's clear is that both teams have adjustments to make in this one. Even that Georgia defense, in my opinion, has to adjust for the possibility of an arch package. Remember, we talked about this the other day. Sark showing that on 4th down at Texas A&M, getting a positive result on that play, a touchdown run from Arch. That sent a loud message. Brilliant move.
You know what? With one play, he graduated from sneaky athleticism, didn't he? Because that dude's a freak.
Arch is faster than he gets credit for. Why do you say that?
Oh, no. Yeah, exactly. But like every competition where he's got sneaky athleticism. No, that dude can go. Like that is a dual threat. I was joking with somebody. It's like, this is more of like Archie and Cooper's son than like Peyton and Eli's son. This guy's got some burners on him.
I think Arch is in the same category as Jackson Arnold. Sneaky, faster than he gets credit. Brock Vandegrift, Garrett Nussmeier, Carson Beck, faster than he gets credit for. Just not sure why I picked those guys, but yeah, if you're Kirby Smart, you know as well as anyone on the face of this earth that backup quarterbacks, they have magical powers against your defense in that building. They do. Everybody's aware of that. You would see a different type of offense if Arch took over for Texas, or even not take over, but if he was just given a series. We know that. And I don't expect that the Georgia defense will come out there and assume that it's going to be a repeat of this first matchup. They will be waiting for what those Sark adjustments are. I expect those Texas protections to be better. I don't know that Kelvin Banks Jr., the future first-round pick, I don't know if he's going to be a full go after he went down and did not return in the A&M game. The good news for Texas is that redshirt freshman Trevor Goosby, I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong. I didn't want to just trust Fowler on that one, sadly. Goosby. Both. We got our bases covered. He stepped in. He played really, really well against that respected A&M front that we have given a lot of love to this season. The other good news, Banks, last game against Georgia didn't go so hot. I said afterwards, I think he should sue Georgia because they just took money out of his bank account for what they did to that poor guy. And he was kind of part of the problem with everything that Jalen Walker and Mikael Williams coming off injury, what they were able to do to disrupt Quinn Ewers that night. Could Banks also be part of the solution in this game? I wouldn't rule that out. We know that the Texas offensive line has benefited greatly from continuity this season. That's going to be such an important thing as you look at playoff success. Which one of these groups has had continuity on the offensive line? We also know that Georgia game was the first time we really saw a chink in the armor. It was the first time probably that there was a negative thing on a broadcast said about the Texas offensive line. If history repeats itself, Glenn Schumann dials up all these perfect pressure packages again, I don't think anybody's going to be stunned. but I just cannot imagine for the life of me with how much I think Steve Sarkisian just eats, sleeps, and breathes this stuff. I can't imagine Sark will not have some sort of adjustment to make to account for that. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to this game. I think it's a lot. I think more yes than no for sure. Like, yeah.
And I'm not saying that it's going to be perfect, and I'm not saying that all of a sudden it's going to be a repeat of what Texas just did against Texas A&M, where I thought that protection could not have been much better. But I just can't imagine it's going to be as overwhelming as it was. Georgia had 10 TFL, 7 sacks that game. I mean, it was so unbelievably one-sided. Texas has to get Trey Wisner a healthy workload for the third consecutive game. He's never had to handle that at any point in his young career. Of course, we talked about that. It's not how he's been used, at least coming into this season, and the running back depth issues with injuries and whatnot. That, of course, opened the door for Wisner, who's become a really reliable player for them. Good running game is how you slow down that pass rush. I've heard it a million times before. You don't need to hear me say that. Get him on those draws, get him on those delayed handoffs, and see what that can do for you early on. Sark likes to do that window dressing pre-snap. Occasionally they'll use Wisner as a decoy. They'll do like an end around to Isaiah Bond, Ryan Wingo. Maybe they'll line up Jaden Blue out wide. They'll do stuff like that. Speaking of Jaden Blue, he played just 16 snaps against A&M because Wisner has really turned into the bell cow back for Sark. And Georgia really, if you're going to be sloppy with tackling, Wisner is a bad guy to miss tackles against. He is so freaking slippery. And I think that's going to be a brutal task for Georgia if they get him going early. Jaden Blue had 0 carries the first time that these two teams played. And he was out there for a season low 2 run plays compared to 29 passing snaps, and he had a team-high 7 catches in this first matchup against Georgia. Do you run some wheel route stuff with him? And do you try and do that in a way that Georgia Tech, I thought, could take advantage of? Probably. What adjustments can Sark make? That's probably been eating at him all week. I think he'd ideally like to kind of save Wisner for being able to carry the football and not worry about him as a pass protector, which he's only done 33 times in 12 games. If I'm Sark, I'm probably thinking, look, if our All-American left tackle can't handle Jalen Walker and Micah Williams, I'm sure as hell not going to expect our running back to be able to pass pro against that. And that's going to be a reliable last line of defense. I would rather have him out there or have Blue out there, give an extra weapon for our guy to be able to get the ball to get the ball to in some space and try and combat that pass rush. That seems like a much better plan.
I would love to see all the tape of genuinely, this isn't even me assuming anything, but I would love to see the tape of coaches putting in their blocking running back and him just sizing a guy up and delivering a block that for sure saved their quarterback a sack. Because I feel like I hear that all the time from coaches, and I very rarely see that running back really get in the hole and do something above replacement value.
Yeah, and when you see it, it stands out. And it's almost like, oh, wow, that running back held up really, really well. Wow, they just kind of blew up. They had an edge rusher, and they just kind of handed him his lunch. That doesn't happen very often. I don't know that you're going to expect to do that against Georgia. I don't think that's very, very likely that those guys will be stopped with a head of steam. What seems inevitable is that Texas will run the football more than it did last time, when obviously game flow was working against that in the things that they have wanted to do with this offense this year. With Ewers' mobility probably still not at full go. He looked good against Texas A&M, but he's still not the most mobile guy, even at 100%. You can't afford to let this Georgia pass rush pin its ears back. If this is a repeat of last time's start, I don't think Sark is going to bank on Quinn Ewers figuring it out. I think we would see Arch. I really do. I think if this is a bad quarter and a half, and it's just man, they're sitting there with 3 points. Georgia's up 14-3. Texas's offense is stuck in the mud. I think we would see him turn to Arch for the rest of the game. Sark knows that this game is going to come down to adjustments, and that one would be the ultimate adjustment, but it's one that I think he's definitely preparing for. And I think at this point you have to, and it's not necessarily an indictment of Ewers. It's just understanding that sometimes you can go into a plan thinking, I'm going to be fastball heavy today, and I'm going to live on that outside part of the plate. and then the first 3 hitters take you the opposite way and put 2 off the wall and then drive. They got 3 all of a sudden. That they got 3 in the first inning, and you're like, well, that game plan is out the window. I got to be able to adjust. That can happen. That can happen for this Texas offense, and maybe they do turn to Arch. Can we talk about Carson Beck for a sec here?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think, and you had a different perspective of this one, of tuning in when you did. You're out to dinner with your mom for her birthday, and then you flipped on the game when Carson Beck kind of figured things out against Georgia Tech and looked much better.
I don't know if I told you this story. When I watched the Super Bowl, the Falcons blew. I never watched the Falcons succeed. I came home and only watched them blow it. It was like the opposite of that.
28-3. Good time to start watching that game. Sorry, Falcon fans, you didn't deserve that. I didn't choose violence today. I promise. I got no ill will against you guys. I don't think that he was great against Georgia Tech. And obviously his receivers didn't help him out. That continues to be a major, major problem. They were better down the stretch. But still, too many moments in that game where you're like, oh, my God, what is he throwing to? The moment with Tate Ratledge pulling Carson Beck aside and kind of getting in his ear, being like, man, you got to lock in right now. You got to figure this out. I would love to know what that conversation was like verbatim. But ESPN did a great job of kind of capturing that. And it felt like a turning point. It felt really important for Carson Beck. I'll say this. Regardless of how well you thought he played that day, the key was that 0 interceptions. None. Couldn't have a back-breaking interception when you're trying to pull off that furious comeback late. Carson Beck is currently riding a streak of 118 consecutive passes without an interception, dating back to the Ole Miss game. That is the longest stretch without an interception of his career. That's good. We know what the issue was in this game against Texas and what prevented Georgia from winning this 42-7. Kind of Carson Beck. It really was. And those, obviously, the Georgia pass catchers gave him no help whatsoever. It would be thoroughly impressive if that interceptionless streak continues against this Texas defense. And remember, this was a Trevor Etienne game the first time. He had all 3 of those Georgia touchdowns. Etienne's not looking like he's going to be back until at least the playoff. TBD on his status, still dealing with the rib injury. Don't expect all of a sudden him to pull a Willis Reed in this game or anything like that. And Texas will not have to prepare for him, I would assume at least. This should be a big Nate Frazier, run-heavy game plan for Mike Bobo. Get those backs involved. The biggest mismatch of this game, maybe you'll disagree with this, I think the biggest mismatch of this game is the Georgia receivers against that Texas secondary. Kind of hard to argue against that. The way that Taft has stepped up too, Anthony Hill Jr. can cover. Like they have so many different guys that just, and they don't miss those tackles in space. So if you want to do those quick hitters like Bobo loves to do, where it's kind of just an extended run play, you're getting the receiver out. It's, and Texas will do that a lot too. It's been very well documented how much they like to throw behind the line of scrimmage, but that's just not been an area where you're really going to get Texas. And they're a more sure-handed tackling team. And it's because those guys in the secondary can break down and they can tackle. And they're not afraid of that contact. And they cover in space really well.
Yeah. I'm right there with you. I think that, if you look at the things that Georgia did well against Georgia Tech, the question is, what can you find in that? And the answer is if Cass Jones is the leading receiver in this game, Texas has stepped on a rig.
Maybe.
Something has gone terrible for Texas, and so point being, it might be good to your point, like maybe everybody shut down, but Arian Smith, not a great day at the office. Love it at the pair of touchdowns, also a fumble. So these, we've said since the beginning of the season, these outside players for Georgia are not going to be a difference maker. They just have not. I think they just do not have the Jimmies and Joes for it. I think more of your interior up back style guys, talking about some of the tight ends, Delp, those type of guys. It feels like Lucky. Like it feels like it's like anybody can get you the yards in an amalgamation. But when you're looking at a Carson Beck who went from a turnover machine for kind of, let's call it the middle, 2/5 of the season, whichever one that would be, then going to here is to say, okay, well, he had 5 tutties, no turnovers in that game, did have a fumble, didn't lose it, right? You would hope that if I told you that happened against Texas, that feels like a pretty easy Georgia win. But it feels like at the same time, Georgia Tech was giving up those underneath routes. They were fine to shut down Texas's receivers for most of the game, right? There was no, obviously, like I said, Lovett got his here and there. But I think if you want the ability to go back and forth with Texas, who, their quarterback has not been healthy all year, does not have great arm strength. Well, guess what? They've known that since week 4. I'm saying they've known that the whole year. So they're still able to get chunk plays. They're still able to do end rounds, jet sweeps, even, break off some run plays. And yeah, I would also say like the Georgia run game as well. I would love to see how they'd match up with PK's defense. And just like looking at it here, there's only been twice this year that Texas has given up 20 or more points. It was in their loss to Georgia, obviously, and then against Vandy. Can't ever sleep on Diego Pavia. But that's the thing. If Georgia can consistently run the ball, all that stuff becomes a lot easier. But they haven't been able to figure that out pretty much all year, So it's the classic. If Georgia could run the ball, things would be different. They could kind of bait and switch those offensive kind of up backs, get them wide open in the middle of the field because guys are getting committed. But one of them has to happen. They either need to run the ball or hit explosive plays down.
Exactly. Because I think the idea of Bobo assuming Carson Beck can throw 40 times and have like what he did against Georgia Tech, I don't think you're going to repeat that. I think that this Texas secondary is too good. They're the ones that believe more in the tips and overthrows. Got to get those. That's Georgia's mantra. Texas is the one that subscribes to that. They're the ones that have a 4 to 18 TD to INT ratio this year. And so, what does that mean? What game plan does Bobo come out with if it's tough sledding going on in the running game? Does that mean you're seeing more of the Cass Jones, who, by the way, is really only playing on passing downs? He's playing a lot more. You finally get Roderick Robinson back at your disposal for Week 14, which was really nice to be able to see him out there for 28 snaps against Georgia Tech in an 8 overtime marathon. You needed that guy on a day in which you were already without ETN, of course. So I don't know. It's a trickier offensive game plan for Bobo than I think the average person would assume, because we know how this can play out. You can go into this and say, well, yeah, run the football, establish the run, trust Nate Frazier, trust that these guys are going to be able to open up holes for you. What happens if it's 2 yards in a cloud of dust and you're not going anywhere and you're stuck in the mud? Because these Texas defensive tackles, even a post-Sweat Murphy era, are still really freaking good. And I don't want to run at Alfred Collins.
And the defense has gotten better since last year.
It has.
I just think straight up the defense has gotten better since last year, because you had those guys in the middle, but to your point, the back end is improving. It's not just, okay, you can't run up the A gap, but you can do other stuff. It's, okay, we hopefully think we can't. Oh, we can't do anything, and this is gone, and this is gone, and the middle is good. So, yeah, this is one of the most complete defenses I think I've ever seen.
It's loaded, man. It's absolutely loaded. And it's going to be a really difficult test because they have just essentially made teams play with their left hand all season. And that's a hard thing to do. And it'll be a hard thing to do against Georgia with the talent that they still have. But, I just think that this is a really interesting psychological game that Georgia's going to have to play, because I think you got to be patient against Texas. If you're just getting those 2 yards and 3 yards, you kind of got to be willing to get this game into the mud. Texas is comfortable winning a game like that. Georgia should be comfortable winning a game like that too, because they keep getting off to all these slow starts. Carson Beck's not even in the top 100 in FBS in first half quarterback rating. Think about that. Not in the top 100 in that. That's how slow this team has started this year. You have to be willing to be like, yeah, if it gets to 7-3 at halftime and we still have a puncher's chance, I've seen us come back in games. I'm not going to be scared of that deficit. I'm not all of a sudden going to be like, oh my God, we need to start hitting these 15, 20-yard pass plays downfield. Ideally, you'd love to be able to go over the top. Do I want to trust those matchups every single time? I don't, because I don't really trust Georgia's receivers. I don't trust them to win those one-on-ones. You trust your quarterback to be able to hit some of these guys in zone coverage, find some of those soft spots. When you do have those big throwing windows, that's when you need to be able to take advantage of that. So the question I keep asking, can Georgia be patient enough to grind out a win against this Texas team in a way that it didn't really have to last time, because its defense played with its hair on fire and won of that game? I think yes. I'm saying that a team in burnt orange doesn't quite have the same effect on Kirby Smart as a team in crimson. I'm saying that Georgia comes out swinging, maybe not swinging as hard as it did last time on the defensive side of the ball. Texas gets up off the mat after it looks like a first-round knockout again. Maybe it's 14-3, Georgia's up early or something like that, and Texas can't really get anything going on offense. I think Texas makes this a 60-minute game, but the poise of Carson Beck in those crucial spots makes a difference. Texas can't get the ball back after it pulls within 6 and this becomes a game. Georgia finds a way to win 27-21, the most roundabout SEC title winner since 2007 LSU. That would be the first time we've had an SEC champion with multiple regular season losses since 2007 LSU. Fun fact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a wild year. Yeah, I'm there with you in terms of, I think that the last game plan is not replicable. To your point, in that reality, okay, how many series for Arch you think?
Gosh, game flow is gonna determine this. I think there's
because if they get down 14-3, I feel like that's about the time. You already got 2 or 3 drives out there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just preach patience for Georgia, and I think Texas is kind of the opposite. I think you kind of need to have that sense of urgency.
Pull the plug.
Yeah, pull the plug. Be willing to make that adjustment on the fly, despite the fact that you were gotten off.
Be standing there with that long, the crook, the sheep's Bo Peep thing that they use to pull people off stage. We'd start with a giant one of those. Okay, Ewers throws his second bad pick. We see the crook come out, pull him in. No, sir, Arch Manning.
Be gentle with Ewers, though. Don't pull too hard on it. He had the rib injury. He's got the ankle. Just be careful. Look, I think that we see one by design. I think we see it on like the third series, maybe the third series of this game for Texas, independent of game flow. I think that's in the design. And then everything from that point is dependent on what kind of success rate they're having on the offensive side of the ball. How comfortable does Ewers look? Does this offensive line look like it's overmatched? And oh my God, you can't have Ewers out there with a limited ankle when George is winning these battles up front. We absolutely need to get Arch out there. I think one by design in that third series, and then they'll kind of make those adjustments from there.
Yeah, I'm actually right there with you. And that was what I started to say whenever you were initially talking about it. It's like, it almost feels like no matter what, we're going to see some Arch in about the third series. Because let's say they come out there and Ewers is cooking, it would still behoove them to get that extra look out there and make the defense. Yeah.
And you could argue, maybe that's going to take Ewers out of a rhythm. Why would you do something like that? There's a case. We play the results with that. That's how that works. But if that's going to be the approach, Texas knows that. Texas knows that in the game plan. That's not all of a sudden going to be Arch going in for Ewers and Ewers is taken aback by it. He's going to know, if that's the plan, hey, you might get into a nice rhythm, but this is our offensive game plan early on. We struggled so much to move the football against these guys last time. We just want to kind of keep them guessing a little bit. And I was looking at Ewers' body language when Arch came in for that fourth down play, and he was hype. He was all about it. And for those who are wondering about that sort of dynamic and how does that impact this Texas team, they might be doing this at just the right time if they're able to do this successfully. And obviously, if Arch comes in and throws a duck and throws a pick when Ewers has been looking great, everybody's going to say, why did Sark make that move? You can't take out Ewers in that spot. And of course, we will play the results. But I think there's a lot to be gained from it. And I think that whatever you can do to keep this defense off balance after how historically dominant they were last time, you got to pull out all the stops if you're Sark, and I bet he will.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to both sides really, like controlling the football. So to your point, like I would rather see Beck have pass attempts in the early 30s, like low 30s or high 20s, because when you think about what a pass attempt equates to, okay, really it's about pass attempts under duress, okay, i.e., let's try to not get him out there with a Texas defender in his face. Let's not get him throwing the ball on a slant route to Dom Lovett, who is covered, but he's trying to get his guy to make a play. Georgia at this point, to your point about Texas, they don't have receivers that are going to win a ton of one-on-one plays, right? So maybe if you had, I don't know, like Luther Burden out there, and you were like, hey, you know what? We're just going to throw the ball 40 times, and we're going to throw 10 of them to Luther Burden, a la Ryan Williams, and whatever he comes down with, this is what he comes down with. I don't really think there's an outcome or a target or a skills player for Georgia that requires you to force the ball anywhere. So I would rather Georgia dink and dunk down the field, and I hate to go back to 3 yards of cloud of dust because that was where I started this whole conversation about Bobo, but in reality, they need to do that more. I've said that since the Alabama game. It's that you got to trust your run game to open up those holes, because if the defense is keying in on Carson Beck and your whole offense looks like, okay, we're going to do some stuff outside, we're going to do some window dressing, some end arounds, we're going to try to spring these guys open. Well, if you're in a position where your guys are fumbling the ball, dropping passes, even if you get that look you're looking for, it may not work out for you, and then the defense has seen something. So point being, and on the other side of that, I will say, I don't think either of us at this point in this job would be, I hate to say dumb enough because you may not agree with me, but we would be cautious enough to say it's impossible for Georgia to come out and just belt to butt again. You know, like it might, because it didn't make sense the first time. Maybe Georgia just comes out there and are overwhelming. Maybe Kirby, this was all part of his master plan against Georgia Tech. They struggled. Now they have all the good plays, whatever. But I do think, you know, we're going to know pretty early. I'm gonna flip your pick where I say that, like, I think that, yeah, there's a comeback in this game. But I think that we're going to know what we need to know from Georgia pretty early. I think that, you know, if it's Carson Beck that's throwing picks or making bad reads, if it's an offense that seems sleepy and like they're going to try to out-talent people, you can't out-talent Texas. On the other side of it, you know, I do like the lever that Texas can pull. So as far as Arch Manning, as far as the running back stable, as far as the different amount of targets they can hit. If one guy has a bad day, you can hit a couple of guys. So I'll say let's go 31-24 Texas for me. And we can be on opposite sides.
Kind of like they were on opposite sides. I went back and forth all week. My early lean was Texas. The closer I got to Saturday, I thought, you know, if I pick against Georgia, Texas is a guaranteed. Like, if I pick against Georgia, Georgia's winning this game by 4 touchdowns, and I'm eating it on Sunday. So I suppose Georgia fans probably wouldn't want me picking for their team, but I just can't shake this notion that Georgia just did things to frustrate Texas, and I don't think any other team that Texas has faced this year was able to do exactly that. But I hope it's a good one.
They have that dog in them. Like, it's that simple. Like, yeah, I could go through schematically. I could go through what they did. But again, as we saw on the offensive side of the ball for Georgia, it wasn't like they were hitting on everything. They just had that dog in them. And when you can't quantify that, it's like the opposite of the Dak Prescott thing. It's like, I know when I'm watching Dak Prescott in a big game, he's going to implode. I know that when Georgia's back's against the wall, like we saw last Saturday, they're going to play really well. So I'm definitely not discounting that. I don't think it's going to be a blowout. It's just at some point, Georgia's got to die. And I do want to ask you this one question. Don't want to get too deep into it, but you know, my little pet projects here. If Georgia were to win this game, what do you think the likelihood would be that they see each other a third time this season?
I predicted it preseason. I'm sticking with it. I was looking at the seedings too. It might not even be the last time that these two teams play each other in this building, because there's 2 more times that Mercedes-Benz is hosting a postseason game, because they're getting the quarterfinal matchup, and then they get the national championship. So in theory, they could play again in that setting. I was looking at it from a first round matchup standpoint. It's not very likely. It's not particularly likely in a quarterfinal either, but a semifinal or a national championship, it could in theory happen. I'm gonna say there's a good chance.
That'd be crazy.
I'm gonna say there's a good chance. I'm gonna stick with it. I'm gonna say that these teams are gonna play 3 times. I said that they're gonna play regular season, SEC championship, national championship. So yeah, why would I back out now? Of course not. Yeah, we're going to stick with that one.
Love it.
Yeah. Arch Manning, SEC championship, MVP. Those odds, I don't know. I haven't looked at those odds. That'd be a fascinating one to dig into. Probably not going to get enough reps to be able to warrant that. But if Texas pulls off a comeback, who knows? Should be an awesome game on Saturday. We will have full coverage, SaturdayDownSouth.com. We'll do our SEC championship recap with that Sunday pod, post-playoff ranking show. We'll kind of just do a recap of the game and everything that played out from it as well. I will be there in Atlanta on Saturday. Looking forward to seeing a lot of people, getting to see my guys Perry and Candler. I think Marler's going to be there as well. It'll be a very, very good time.